Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
The world calls many things blessed. Comfort is blessed. Success is blessed. Applause, approval, ease. These are the world's beatitudes, whispered through every advertisement and echoed in every broadcast. But on a hillside in Galilee, Christ pronounced a different kind of blessing, one so countercultural that it still startles us 2,000 years later. He called the persecuted blessed. Persecution. The word lands heavy. Nobody welcomes it. Nobody prays for it. Nobody pencils it into the calendar. And yet here it stands, the final pillar of the Beatitudes, the crown that completes the whole architecture of Christian living. The first 7 Beatitudes describe what we must do. They sketch the dispositions of the soul, poverty of spirit, mourning, meekness, hunger for righteousness, mercy, purity of heart, peacemaking. These are the doors to right perception, the attitudes we need to adopt and cultivate over a lifetime in order to be blessed. But the 8th Beatitude is different. It describes not what we do, but what is done to us. It is the world's response to a good life, lived for the sake of righteousness. The first 7 shape the person. The 8th reveals the cost of being a righteous person. And notice something striking. The 8th Beatitude shares its promise with the first. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:3. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. These are the bookends between poverty of spirit and persecution, holding the whole life of a righteous person in place. The same promise stands at the door and at the destination. And note the tense. Theirs is, not theirs will be. The kingdom is not a distant inheritance waiting at the end of a long road. It is a present possession in this life. Can you imagine a truly good life, a truly upright life that costs you nothing? Can you picture righteousness without resistance, light that draws no shadows, salt that has no sting? In the Gospel of John, Jesus prepared us for persecution. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. John 15:18 and 20. He spoke these words not to frighten us, but to forewarn us, to fortify us, so that when the blows would come, we would not be surprised or unprepared. The history of faith confirms what Jesus foretold. Of the Old Testament prophets, most were rejected, exiled, or killed. Of the 12 apostles, all but one died as martyrs. And the long pattern continues into our own day. Christians remain among the most persecuted religious group in the world, with thousands losing their lives each year for the name of Christ. This is not an aberration. This is fidelity meeting a fallen world. Perhaps the cruelest persecution is the kind no outsider inflicts, the kind that comes from those who should know better, from within the very household of faith. Flannery O'Connor, who loved the church even as she suffered, wrote a line that ought to be carved over every disciple's desk. You suffer as much from the church as for it. St. John of the Cross was imprisoned, beaten, and tortured by members of his own religious order, the very order he sought to reform. From a dark cell in Toledo, with barely enough light to see, he composed some of the most luminous poetry in the Christian tradition. Dante Alighieri was driven from Florence by a church faction under threat of being burned alive if he returned. He spent the rest of his life in exile, and in that exile he wrote The Divine Comedy, the greatest spiritual journey ever set to verse. The pattern is consistent. The persecuted soul, pressed down, rises upward. The cell becomes a cathedral. The exiled become pilgrims. What was meant to silence becomes a song of freedom. This beatitude rests with particular weight upon the artist. The artist, after all, is one called to dive deep into reality, in search of its meaning, refusing to be confounded by the wiles of the world, or seduced by its applause. Whether the medium is paint or poetry, stone or song, prose or sacred silence, the true artist becomes a witness, and every witness to truth must, sooner or later, be ready to suffer for it. Though Christ pronounced this blessing on a Galilean hillside to fishermen and laborers, its embrace extends to every soul of goodwill, to anyone who refuses to flinch from the truth, who insists on telling what they have seen, and who labors to remain faithful to the truth entrusted to them. For every honest pilgrim journeying toward truth, the eighth beatitude is both warning and consolation. Here lies the secret that turns persecution from poison into medicine. It is not about you. It may feel personal. The words may sting like venom. Exclusion may ache like a wound that will not close. But persecution, when it comes for righteousness' sake, is not about the person who suffers from it. It is about what that person stands for. The persecutor strikes at the righteous and discovers, like the maniacal Captain Ahab in Melville's Moby Dick, that he is striking at the truth, at God himself. This realization is liberating. It removes the burden of self-defense. It transforms the persecuted from victim to witness, to someone chosen and counted worthy to stand for the truth. How then shall we live, knowing that persecution awaits us? First, pray for the persecuted. Somewhere in the world tonight, a true believer will be imprisoned or beaten for the name of Christ. Their suffering is your family business. To pray for them, to support them, to remember them by name whenever you can. This is not charity, but kinship. Second, pray for the grace to endure. You may feel certain you could never bear what others have borne. That feeling is not a verdict, it is an invitation. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who resisted the Nazi regime at the cost of his life, warned the church against what he called cheap grace, a sentimental Christianity that wants the comfort of faith without its cross. He discovered that the grace to endure is not stockpiled in advance like emergency rations. It is given in the hour of need. Pray for it. Trust that it will come. Third, pray for those who persecute you and others. This is the hardest, and it is the most Christ-like. Your persecutors are often more wounded than you know. I once knew a good man in Orlando who had volunteered to drive me through the city he knew so well as I brought communion to the sick. He confided in me that a particular acquaintance had relentlessly belittled him and tried to undermine him for doing this work, insisting that ministry belonged only to priests and that he had no business putting on airs. The criticism was constant, sharp, exhausting. Then this volunteer went on vacation with his wife. Do you know who approached me to take the place of my volunteer during his absence? You guessed it. His persecutor, secretly. The persecutor admired my volunteer, but could not bring himself to admit it. The mockery, it turned out, had been the cover for a longing he could not yet name. I learnt something very important from this experience. Our persecutors are wrestling too. They are searching, often clumsily, often cruelly, for the same light that wounds them when it shines too brightly. Pray for them. You may be the only one who does. Fourth, remember the reward. Rejoice and be glad. Jesus says immediately after the eighth beatitude, for your reward is great in heaven. Matthew 5:12. Persecution is not the road to death. It is the road to life. The kingdom is not a consolation prize handed out to soften the blow of suffering. It is the very thing suffering opens us into. The world's blessings fail us. Comfort fades. Applause stops. Success rusts. But the blessing Christ pronounced on the hillside operates by the strange logic of the cross. What looks like loss is gain. What looks like defeat is victory. What looks like death is life. What looks like grief is joy. To be persecuted for righteousness is to be drawn deeper into the heart of the one who was persecuted for our sake. It is to find, in the very place of our wounding, that he has gone before us. And in that finding, we discover what the Eighth Beatitude has been promising all along. The kingdom is already ours. Thank you for listening, and I am Hugh Duffy.